Good morning, everybody, or whatever time of day you are listening to this. We are back after another Formula E race. It is our first doubleheader of the season, so it really does feel like we're fully in Formula E mode now because we got a doubleheader. I feel like that is what I need to actually get into the vibe. And joining today is, of course, the one, the only, Chris Stevens. How are you doing today, mate?
Hey, Macy. It's been sort of like a quiet start to the season because we had two single headers, but now Formula's properly back with these two mad races in one weekend.
Not just two races, but we've had a little bit of time to get used to the new attack mode with four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, and now we also get the added little magic that is the pit boost.
Yeah, first ever pit boost. It was interesting, wasn't it? And it definitely changed the style of racing that we saw. So the difference between the first and second races was so stark. I didn't think it was going to be that big because we're talking about an extra 10% of energy that you get in the pit boost race, but it really did make a massive difference. Race 2, much more the peloton style racing that we're used to seeing. Not my kind of racing. I definitely felt like the first race was much more, I don't want to say pure. That's like the wrong word for it, but I enjoyed it a lot more. I've been very vocal about the fact that I don't like the peloton races. And to be honest, when I first watched the first race, I wasn't completely sold on it. But compared to the other type of racing we get, much, much better.
It was not just the change in strategy that we saw where there were just more options. You can choose to do pit boost first, you can choose to do attack mode first, and teams learning which one is going to be more beneficial for which tracks we're at. But I feel like it was just the attitudes of the drivers that was so different because they knew they had that extra thing in their back pocket. They knew that there was more to play with, and that made such a difference. They were being more punchy. I feel like they were being more defensive, which isn't something you get in the peloton racing because they're going, you know what? Yeah, you can go ahead and I'll slide back. And there was a lot less of that give and take. It was just, I'm going to try and take it. Good luck. I'm not letting you do that, which is what you love to see. I don't love seeing, you can count all the overtakes you want, Formula E, you can put them up as this majestic stat. But are they really overtakes if the position is just given up? I would argue not. And this time around, race 1, it was pure. It was attack, defense, no give and take, just try me, bro. Try.
The kind of epitome of that really is that we just got done watching race 2, and I don't remember Ollie Rowland's race-winning move, right? I couldn't tell you when he actually hit the front in that race, but for sure it's going to be a long time before I forget Max Günther, 2 corners to go, sailing past Rowland. And to be honest, that wasn't necessarily directly related to the pit boost, was it? That was more the Nissan team mismanaging Ollie's use of energy throughout that race. What I did enjoy about the pit boost was for how sort of constricted it is in terms of you have to use it between this certain window of SOC left in the battery state of charge, and it has to be this amount as well. The variations that we were able to see in terms of the strategy with the attack mode on top of that as well, because we would see some come out of the pits and then immediately take an attack mode to try and get some speed boost while they were in relatively cleaner air. But some decided to use it later as well. And that's really kind of what made a difference as well, because Günther saved his attack mode for later in the race. And we've often seen that saving it for later in the race can be more beneficial. So you have to juggle it between, do I want to use it to gain track position during the pit stop sequence, or do I save it and come back for later in the race? Because Günther was down in, 8th, 9th at one point, and I thought, wow, that's, from pole position down to 8th, that's pretty disastrous after the pit stop sequence. But he was able to charge back through and helped a little bit by this mismanaging of the energy on Rowland's car. So much more memorable. I did appreciate more the flat-out style of racing. for sure it was harder to overtake. I mean, how long was Gunter looking at the back of, I think it was Barnard for second? He seemed to be stuck behind him for ages. Even with attack mode, it seemed like a bit of a struggle. But again, it's going to be more memorable and it's more enjoyable than just watching them give up positions because they don't want to be leading.
Especially because teams are not just managing their energy, they're trying to keep track of not just the 2 attack modes, not just the battery power of all the other cars, but also if they've used pit boost and trying to keep track of that. I mean, that's absolutely phenomenal. I want to touch on the graphics just a little bit because that's something I pay attention to. I like how they switched attack mode to being those 2 little pink dots.
Right? That's
I
like
love that.
the best thing that they've done in terms of graphics in years.
Absolutely love that. But I wish instead of it just being the 2 pink dots, I wish that they would have just added the green little dot for pit boost as well. To have it all in one place, seeing it all at once, instead of it being on the 2 opposite sides of the driver's name. Like, just tweak your graphic a little bit, tweak the size of it. We'll know what it means. And that's so much more helpful to see them all 3 at once.
The difference between, because there was a graphic for they can pit and one for they have pitted. And the difference between the 2 was just one slightly shaded, the lightning bolt was a slightly different color. That isn't a big enough of a difference, I feel like, between the 2 little icons next to the driver's name. So just something to accentuate that a little bit, perhaps. But overall, I felt it was very well done. And I think it's only going to get better because, like, first time round, it was always going to be a bit of a struggle, I think, not just for the teams, for the broadcasters, for people to try and keep on top of as well. Because it is also, we talk about the return of pit stops in Formula E because we used to have the car swap back in the day. Very different style of stop, though, wasn't it? And it used to be much more obvious because you could see a lot more happening in the stop with a driver jumping from one car to the other compared to them sitting stationary in the box with nothing happening for 30 seconds. But also the window was much, much narrower when they did those stops. It used to be basically a 2-lap window at the halfway mark in the race to do the car swap back then. Whereas now the pit window, with it being between 60 and 40% of the sock in the battery, it's a much bigger window, and so you have this bigger portion of the race where you're not necessarily watching the battle unfold right in front of you, and you need a little bit more context to it.
And generally speaking, there wasn't too many problems as well, which was the incredibly, like, you had Tictum, he had an issue and he had to reset his battery.
But I don't think that wasn't necessarily related to the pit boost, though, was it? That was just something they needed to do before doing the pit boost. And he made his feelings on the matter very clear.
As Tictum does, yes.
Yes, there is a video on TikTok, and I'm sure it's on some other social media channels now as well, of his full team radio of that moment, being told what he needed to do, and then him in the box. And at one point he said, I'm just going to get out of the car, whatever. Does what he always does, where he says, that's it, I'm done, and then carries on. But there was one, apparently, Jake Dennis's second battery failure of the season. Because remember, he had a red car in Sao Paulo in the opening meeting where his car failed. He had a battery-related issue in race 1 that was potentially related to the pit boost. And to be honest, Jake Dennis has been having really awful luck as well, because also on Saturday morning he had another battery issue. So I'm not sure if he's just been really unlucky there, whether it was actually related to pit boost. I'm sure they'll look into it. But all in all, I think very successful debut for pit boost. And it helped as well. We got that grandstand finish as well, because Formula E can sort of sell that. Like, look at what this race ended up being, with 2 corners to go, and we get a lead change, and it's in spectacular fashion.
They also added the disco ball feature for the lights on the car, which I think is kind of the highlight of it all. That is the best part. Who doesn't want a car that looks kind of like a disco ball?
Because they all go into the magenta colors when they're in the 350 mode, and because it's on that for the start, I almost got like blindsided by it a little bit because they're all charging to the first corner at the start of the race with the magenta lights on, and it felt like I was in some sort of rave that I hadn't been invited to.
Anytime we get to see Formula E cars at night, even if the track is like very lit up, it still just looks so good, so sharp. And it always makes me go, can you guys just add underlighting as well? You have it everywhere else. Just give me the underglow as the
Race
just cherry on
cars
top.
always look better under the floodlights. Always.
Always 10 out of 10. Our recommendation, if you can, go see a night race. They're
Do
phenomenal.
you know, well, actually, we didn't necessarily put this down in the notes, but I thought the circuit worked quite well.
We did.
I was a little nervous seeing chicane spam again because it felt very OG Formula E. And I can't work out yet if that's a good or a bad thing. It used to just be like, oh, Formula E tracks, they've got just a billion of these super tight chicanes where they literally just put a block, like a tire stack and a concrete barrier in the middle of a straight to give them a braking zone. And it kind of felt like, haven't we outgrown this by now? And I get that when they're going to a permanent facility and they need to add some sort of stopping mechanism into the circuit to create regen opportunities and also, a bit more overtaking opportunity maybe. There isn't so much they can do. And I maybe it could have been done slightly more eloquently than particularly the two on the start and finish straight. The one on the back straight wasn't necessarily so bad because it was a bit more of a sort of bus stop style chicane, which is quite fun, but especially because the curbs, there was different curbs on the last two chicanes compared to the one in the on the back straight, and it felt like they didn't like to ride those curbs particularly very much because they were sort of bouncing over them and sort of waiting for the car to settle before they could carry on. I actually think that ended up making quite a huge difference, like compliance over those curbs in the car setup probably made quite a big difference, or the style of driving over those curbs probably made quite a big difference in the end.
I mean, we did notice a couple of moments over there. The notable one being Barnard during the last lap or two while he was trying to defend Hughes and he just about lost it. And seeing the regain of control was very satisfying. But it created some tense moments for sure, those curbs.
Those bottlenecks, I see, that's when I really don't like those chicanes because that's when you end up with a traffic jam and you could be 10 cars back and something can happen way up ahead and you've got absolutely nothing to do with it, but you end up getting crunched because somebody's caused a bottleneck 10 cars up. I'm not necessarily a fan of that, but it does kind of go hand in hand with Formula E's, we are the chaos machine identity that it's picked up and has really admitted to just leading into with the introduction of pit boost alongside attack mode. That's what they said. We are the chaos racing series now. So it works for them. I don't necessarily know if I like it necessarily.
Well, and we really got back into that little bit of chaos this weekend. That first race, trying to figure out who hit what, who had a front bumper left.
Yeah.
It felt like the first time this year that we had seen front wings just fly off, dangling on for dear life, looking on track and going, how long are they going to leave that out there? Are we going to go pick that up? Okay, we're going to wait a couple laps and then do it after the guy in the lead has created a gap and then close that up. Cool. Fantastic. Love that you're sticking to your values, Formula E.
And what did I say like a few episodes ago? And again, I've got such a real sense of vindication about this. The cycle of Formula E bodywork, which goes, weaken the front wings, and then everyone loses their front wing every race. So you strengthen the front wings. Oh, everyone gets rear punctures. What happened on lap 1 in race 1? Evans goes into the back of Verline, and Verline gets a puncture. and ruins his race. And so now, obviously, they'll all be saying, "Oh, we need to weaken the front wings, and we need to boost up the rear ends of the cars because they're completely exposed, as well." So yeah, again, we're going back into we'll end up going back into debris all over the circuit, which is what we ended up with anyway. Because the safety car in that first race, it wasn't necessarily for one incident. It was more of there's a bit too much debris on the track now for our liking.
Some of it went absolutely flying as well that first race. Like
Yeah.
it was comical how high in the air some of that went. Just
And how
flying.
high in the air Nico Muller went.
That too.
On the
I'm
first
surprised
lap.
we didn't get that many replays of that. I feel like we only got one.
Yeah, I feel like they didn't have too much coverage of it, to be honest. Quite an awkward spot on the circuit for that to happen, really.
Absolutely tragic. We love a good dissecting of the physics that these absolute beasts of cars can somehow find their way into. And speaking of finding your way into interesting situations, one of the more interesting weekends for Maximilian Günther, because very high for that first race, and then coming down to a spectacular low. He wins the first race at the last possible opportunity that he can, and just gives us this gorgeous moment to look back on for all eternity. And then the second race, he's out at lap 1.
Yeah. Yeah, tale of two halves, really, this weekend for Max Günther, because he sticks it on pole position, kind of out of nowhere as well, because right up until the final of qualifying for race 1, it looked like it was going to be Wehrlein again, like third time this season, because he's had both pole positions prior to this weekend. And Wehrlein looked like the quicker driver as well through most of that final. But then Wehrlein makes a little mistake. Günther also makes some improvements on his previous laps. Like, he was more building up to the lap, whereas Wehrlein had probably already hit his peak. And snatches pole position away from the form man of the season, and was really strong in the early stages of that race. And we alluded to it earlier. Fell back in the middle of the race, but saved up the attack modes, charged through, took advantage of Nissan's mishandling of the energy, and gives us this staggering last corner victory, and his first pole position and his first win for DS Penske as well. And kind of, Lord knows they needed a good result, because it's been a while. Günther hasn't won a race in 2 years before this weekend, and I genuinely cannot remember the last DS or Maserati win, if we've had one.
It was 2023, I think they said on the broadcast.
Yeah, for him, I can't remember if DS had won a race as well, because obviously they share the sort of Stellantis branded powertrain between the two teams, DS Penske and Maserati. And that, I think politically that has big implications as well, because DS is yet to announce its commitment to Gen 4. Or sorry, Stellantis is yet to announce its, whichever way you look at it. I really hate the branding and the wording around this particular manufacturer, because they used to try and convince us that they were two separate powertrains before they just sort of leaned into the Stellantis thing. If you don't know what Stellantis is, by the way, it is the owning group between DS and Maserati, in the same way that Volkswagen owns both Audi and Porsche. And but it's very good timing for them, because they're yet to announce their commitment to Gen 4. This might, help convince some of the higher ups to keep pumping money into the Formula E program. And then just absolute hero to zero moment with the absolute clumsiest, most ridiculous lap 1 maneuver. And I haven't heard of her. Maybe it was struggling to slow the car down for whatever reason, but it did look like just absolute fired a missile into Da Costa, and I didn't see if he ended up with any sort of penalty. I imagine it's going to be one that carries over to Miami.
And this would have been when they still had the all-wheel drive activated, correct?
Oh,
That would have been
No,
done
it would
already.
have. They would have gone back to two-wheel drive and 300 kilowatts by that point. It only goes up to the first corner.
Very good, very good. Important thing to identify because
Mm,
I imagine it's something to get used to, is having all the
yeah,
wheels going and also that transition point. That's the one thing that I have so many questions about, is if the drivers, how do you, it's just such a different feeling having all-wheel drive versus just the two of them and going between them in these critical moments. That must
because
be so jarring.
if you're in attack mode as well, it can happen to you mid-corner. So you're committed on the brakes. You've got your four-wheel drive. I imagine that's when the communication with the engineer becomes really critical, and they say, "You're right. You've got like 5 seconds left of the attack," and you think, "Oh, okay, I'm coming up to a corner. I better just treat it like I've got two-wheel drive because I know I'm going to lose drive in the front wheels in the middle of this corner." This is something I'd be really interested to talking to some drivers about during the break between now and Miami.
Exactly. All of these critical changes that are coming to the sport and all of their thoughts and opinions on what has already transpired. One guy, though, who I think would have to say that his season is off to an excellent start, is Roland.
Yes.
Ollie Roland, man that you are. Double podium this weekend, P2, P1, in spectacular fashion, close to 6 seconds ahead. Made it look effortless to adapt to this new thing, the pit boost. Made it look effortless to conserve energy. And yes, he did, minor fumble of P1 to P2 in that first race.
Which wasn't necessarily his fault. He didn't have the information.
But it's just, small little thing of adapting and learning. And the fact that a bad weekend for him learning how to use something new is P2 is pretty spectacular. And now he's leading the Drivers' Championship.
By some margin as well, like 17 points he's been able to pull up. And I cannot believe this statistic. If you look at the championship standings, there you'll see Mr. Ollie Rowland on 68 points. But if you were to look at the team's championship, we know that Norman Nato, his Nissan teammate, hasn't necessarily had a strong start to the season. He is pointless at this point in the season after 4 races. And yet, if you look at the team's championship standings, Nissan on top. That means that Ollie Rowland himself has scored more points than every other team has been able to score with 2 cars at this point in the season.
Absolute unit. Incredible performances, incredible start to the season. I'm just fingers crossed that this continues throughout the entirety of it, because I could watch Oliver Rowland race weekend in, weekend out, because
100%.
it is just phenomenal.
I'm going to go out on a lamb and say that Ollie Rowland is the best driver in Formula E at the moment.
100%.
I don't think that's a controversial opinion. And like at the start of the season, you could have thrown at me, well, Pascal, well, Antonio Felix D'Agosto, Jake Dennis, Nick Cassidy, Mitch Evans. Where are they? Like, where are they at the moment? Yes, there are car struggles to throw into that as well. But if you want to find someone who is just consistently always at the front, you count on Ollie Rowland.
And I think it's also a ringing endorsement of his skills that in P2, right behind him, is Taylor Barnard, who has been mentored by Ollie Rowland. He went up through a karting program that Rowland was running. And so you've had Ollie in your ear for how many years, giving you tips, tricks, and just giving feedback. And the fact that this is the debut that we're getting from Taylor Barnard, he has, 3 podiums at this point, a pole position. He very nearly got a win this weekend. That is a ringing endorsement as well, I think.
Absolutely. It really makes me hope that maybe Ollie will restart the karting team. He recently had to shut the team's doors. But Taylor came up through Ollie Rowland's racing team, and I think I really hope that this is an encouraging sign for other young drivers as well, because obviously he didn't necessarily pursue Formula One while he was in Formula 2, but he basically gave up the end of his Formula 2 campaign last year to commit to Formula E. And I hope that other young drivers see this and realize that Formula One isn't necessarily the bubble, and that are other opportunities out there, and whether it's in Formula E, whether it's in sports car racing or GT racing. And this kid, he's just turned 20, isn't he? So youngest pole sitter now, and it wasn't like the previous qualifying dual final where it was a bit Gunter finding speed. It was a bit Pascal Wehrlein making a couple of mistakes. Barnard was the benchmark in that entire qualifying session. He did 3 laps that were good enough for pole position in the duels. So he was the benchmark. And I think really ultimately the difference between the win and the loss for him today, there obviously wasn't the equipment because McLaren and Nissan used the same hardware. I do think it was more experience came down to it. Ollie Rowland's a seasoned race winner. He's been in the series for several years now. Taylor Barnard's in his, seventh race as a driver. And having had 3 podiums in 4 races is a brilliant start to the season. Where he sort of came a little bit unstuck today was that because he had Jake Hughes in the Maserati sort of charging up at him. He had that extra 30 seconds of attack mode, so he had to try and maintain. I've got to keep him behind for these 30 seconds, then it will get a lot easier. But defensive driving is very inefficient, and obviously in Formula E, efficiency is the name of the game, right? You have to overslow the car. You have to cover the inside. You have to overslow the car. You then have to spend more energy getting back up to speed. And then you sort of snowball because, oh, no, I need to save more energy. Oh, but now he's attacking me even harder, so I have to defend more. And then you spend more energy. And so you end up in a toboggan. And I think Taylor really showed us his defensive skills today, right on the limit of what is acceptable in defensive driving against Jake Hughes at certain points. But in the end, I think Jake was just quite happy to sort of come away with the points as well, because that's his first podium for Maserati. Huge 180 swing as well for that team between the Friday and the Saturday. And again, there was the swap between Maserati and DS Penske of Jake Hughes and Max Gunter during the off season. And so as much as, Gunter had a strong weekend on the Friday, Jake Hughes was able to pull a good result for Maserati on the Saturday as well. So they're, as a manufacturer, working quite well now. It's a shame for Stoffel Van Dorn that he wasn't in that party as well, after what is really a really stupid thing to get disqualified from qualifying over. If you missed it, Van Dorn had to start at the back, having qualified 4th alongside Hughes. They'd locked out the second row of the grid. His fire extinguisher wasn't primed. It wasn't armed. And that is just such a stupid order of operations thing to miss, and a really stupid way of losing a great grid spot, which then obviously just makes the race a lot harder. I know that we had, Jake Dennis go from 19th to 4th, but it's not as easy as just sort of pootling by everyone, because you have to use that energy to get up to people. So the fact that Dennis was able to do it, but not too many others were able to just make up all these places, I think it says a lot about Dennis as well. Sorry, I covered quite a lot of different tangents in a very short space of time there.
Chris's stream of thought, nothing but Formula E.
Yeah, but that's kind of how a Formula E race goes, doesn't it? You sort of sit there and you're like, oh, well, yeah, now he was in 7th, now he's leading. And it's only been 2 seconds since I looked at the leaderboard.
You blink and you miss it. This entire race too was a fever dream almost of, I have no clue who is where. I have no clue when this shuffle started from like lap 2 to lap, I want to say like 25. I was just going, fantastic. You guys are shuffling through. No one has had a major incident. No one has done anything incredibly cool. And then you get to those last couple of laps and the fight for P2, having 5 cars right there, having Barnard defending against Hughes, Hughes giving it his absolute all to try and like punch it. And you're sat there just watching and going, one small mistake and either we're going to have a great upset and like the ones at the back are going to end up at the front on the podium, yay, or all 5 of them just absolutely barrel into each other and we have a massive pile up, which would also be very Formula E.
I can't state enough how disinterested I was in the first 40 minutes of the second race, where it is just the shuffling. Because what is the point? You're just waiting for the moment where they start putting the hammer down a little bit and really, oh, I can lap 3 seconds a lap faster than I currently am. I better start doing that. There's just no point. The pessimist would say it's like watching the first 23 hours and 45 minutes of Le Mans. Like, no, it doesn't really matter. The last 15 minutes is what counts. I don't think that necessarily, but some people of our panel who are not on today would suggest such a comment. Or it's like when you do fan surveys, and how much of a Grand Prix do you watch? Do you watch all of it, or do you just watch the start and the finish? Because that's the exciting bit. And to be honest, with these Formula E style races, the peloton style races, which again, it's just is another overused expression that I hate that that I use as well. It does more feel like that because you're watching the start to see if anybody smashes into someone, like with Gunter and DaCosta, and then you may as well go and make a cup of tea and like put your dinner on and like just not engage with it for the next 40 minutes because what is the point? It has no bearing on in any tangible and digestible way for the viewer. There's no service to it at all.
And in that sense, it makes me really happy that we have something like Pit Boost and you want to see it more often because at least it's adding something for the viewer. You get to see them go into the pit box. You get to make note of, okay, these are the cars that are charging. You get the cool overhead shots of them sliding into the box and trying to race each other in the pit lane. And it is that little bit more, just more than watching another clip of them shuffling through and going, oh, this is very nice. Look at all the colorful cars going forward, backwards, switch, 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 like some chaotic choreography. Instead, you know that it will make a difference to strategy. You know they're going to come out a little bit more punchy. And that, just that mental switch almost makes the bigger difference.
How many, single headers?
I think it's just Miami left.
Just Miami?
I think
everything
so.
Else is a double header. So this is basically the sort of template we have now for the rest of the season. I hope in Miami we don't end up with a peloton style race and they'll adjust the race distance accordingly. But literally all you'd have to do is make the non-pit boost race 2 laps shorter. And you would not end up with this style of racing. And you'd get something that's more akin to the pit boost race where they're pushing a little bit harder and they're not just waving each other by all the time. And I'll go back to what I said about the race winning overtake. We're all going to be talking about Gunter and Roland on the last lap for a while. What did Roland do today to take the lead? I couldn't tell you.
He got it at one point and then he just ran with it.
Exactly. But I should remember that moment. I should be having chills about it, and I should be oh, what an amazing thing he did to take the lead. That was so amazing, and he totally deserved the win because of it. But we don't have that at all. It's completely missing. Sport should be bringing out emotion in the viewer, and this brings out nothing in me.
It's so frustrating as well because you know that it's so incredibly impressive that he was able to win by that margin.
Yeah, by 5 seconds.
But the fact that he did it just so quietly, so just like calmly and just, oh yeah, I have energy.
Yeah.
It's, it's impressive, but it's also so understated that you're just going, this is also so frustrating. I want it to feel like this big momentous moment that you can cheer for. And instead it's just, oh, Ollie Rowland doing Ollie Rowland things.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I don't want to be too negative about it. I feel like I'm being really negative. But I don't want it to dampen on what has overall been a very enjoyable weekend of racing.
Exactly. And again, I've said it once, I will continue to say it. You don't bring out criticism for something unless you think it can be better, and you want it to be better, and you want that because you enjoy it. There's no point in us saying these things if we don't think that it genuinely would be good.
Exactly. We
It's all
didn't
from a
get
place of love.
we didn't get a Valentine's Day card from Formula E this year, right? And I feel like now we have 364 days to get in their good books and get that Valentine's Day card for next year.
Maybe we just need to start sending them cards.
Maybe.
Maybe express our love and adoration for all things that are
That's
electric cars with
every
sparkly
episode.
lights.
Every episode now will be a love letter to Formula E.
Uh, Now, if you have an undying compliment you would like to send to Formula E, feel free to send it to the email that is listed down below. But you can also just send us comments or questions, because there is quite the break that is coming up between these last two spectacular races and coming up, which is Miami, a single header on April 12th. So send in questions, send in topics you'd like us to dive into, and keep an ear out because Chris has a couple fun things planned.
I do, yes. So if you do have anything you want us specifically to talk about, feedback@missedapex.net. Stick Formula E in the subject matter so that we know it's about this show specifically. And so I'm sure at some point over the course of the next, God, what is it, 8 weeks between now and Miami, April 12th? God. All because of this, cancelled race, and they're doing this Formula E Evo celebrity thing as well, which I don't think we're even going to be able to necessarily do a show about because it's not, as far as I can tell, it's not being live streamed.
I also don't know most of the celebrities that are listed.
Really?
I don't know most of them. No, I know like two.
Some of them. I know some of them.
Two of them, which isn't enough for me to watch. Yeah.
So Draco Malfoy and, I don't know, maybe a footballer.
Cleo Abrams is the only one on that list that I know. And I know her name, but I don't know much beyond.
Can I, totally random tangent as well, but I don't know if you saw, if you got the same feed as us, but before the actual race broadcast bit starts up, obviously they had Chris Eubank talking about fighters in the ring and are you ready? You're asking me? And then he stood up and flipped over the press conference table as part of the intro sequence.
We had an intro sequence. I don't know who the person you're talking about is, and I don't
Chris Eubank Jr.
That means nothing to me, but okay, I now know that is a boxer. Very good.
Yeah, son of Chris Eubank, one of the most famous boxers of all time. All right, anyway.
Very good.
That was really cool. I kind of want him to get in a car now just so I can see how he'd do. But anyway, the point I was trying to make, feedback@missedapex.net. We'll probably try and do a mailbag at some point, but also all the stuff I promised that was going to happen before Jeddah ended up sadly getting pushed back. So all of that now is going to happen pre-Miami, which is great because we've got quite a few weeks of content to fill. But just keep an eye on your Missed Apex Formula E feed because we are coming up with content and good stuff as well. Stuff I'm really, really excited about.
Give Chris and I an excuse to hang out with each other and chat about things Formula E because we always love that good excuse to chill, to hang out.
You haven't had enough of us after the Rolex stream we did and all the other stuff. Yeah.
Never enough, Chris. Alrighty. Thank you for joining us. We've had a phenomenal time, and we will see you all a lot sooner than you think. Have a great week, and we will chat with you soon. Bye.